morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told, out of Voice of Radio. So today, I am back, well, really to finish off a promise. You see, I promised you that the new Obstagoon coming in Sword and Shield was a legitimately good card that is already seeing play and success and winning over in Japan. It's won some smaller tournaments, it's placed very highly in some bigger tournaments. It is proving to be a really good deck. But it's not exactly very much fun if all I do is tell you it's good. Seems like the kind of thing that I should be proving. So to that end, let's take a look at a winning Obstagoon deck, shall we? And as a side note, I do have 2 winning deck lists that I can show you at the end of this video. I'm nice like that. Now, our translations all come from the lovely David Hockman over at limitlesstcg.com/translations. And what we see here really is the ability, when you play this Pokemon from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon during your turn, you may place 3 damage counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon. It's not a new ability. It's one we've seen before. We saw it on Crobat. We saw it on Greninja. It was good on both of them. And what we do is we use this to just drop a whole bunch of damage counters. Now, worth pointing out at this stage that the Galarian Zigzagoon does also have a really nice ability that drops 1 damage counter, not unlike Crobat G. Okay, 1 damage counter isn't amazing, but it's still 1 damage counter. It's fine, it will do, it'll help us out. But we shouldn't sleep on the fact that this has a really nice attack as well. The attack here for 1 darkness, 1 colourless energy, does 90 damage, and during your opponent's next turn, you prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks from your opponent's basic Pokemon. It basically makes you immune to basic Pokemon during your opponent's next turn. And at the moment, we have a format that is absolutely swimming in basic Pokemon. On this side of the pond, we've got stuff like Gardevoir and Sylveon, Mewtwo and Mew, Reshiram and Charizard, etc. And then over in Japan, the format seems to be dominated at the moment by decks like Zacian V and Morpeko V. I'll link videos to those decks in the description. So my point is, we are in an extremely basics-heavy format. And yeah, there'll be some decks playing evolutions that can get around it. That's inevitable. That's something we've got to deal with and put up with. But the fact of the matter is, there are a lot of decks around at the moment that are basically only playing basic Pokemon. And at the risk of sounding a little bit mean, this just lets you pick on those decks. But largely here we're focusing on the ability. And now the deck lists I'm going to show you are both a little bit different. But the one thing that they have in common is they both play Yveltal GX and Sableye V. Because these are the perfect Pokemon to take advantage of this ability. Now, Yveltal GX has seen a little bit of play here and there. It's come around in Gengar decks, the one from Unbroken Bonds. And what it says is that if your opponent's Pokemon is a GX attack, so it's only once per game, having said that, it is also for a single Darkness Energy, which you're playing anyway for Obstagoon. If your opponent's Pokemon has exactly 4 damage counters, instant KO. Regardless of how many prizes it gives up, regardless of how much HP it has, regardless of anything else, if they've got exactly 4 damage counters on, you exactly get a KO. And bearing in mind that Galarian Zigzagoon drops 1 damage counter, and Obstagoon drops 3 damage counters, oh yeah, 1 plus 3 is 4. See where we're going with this? Instant KO. And a very, very easy KO as well. Like a super easy KO. And that's kind of our point here. Now, that's only once per game. We also use Sableye V here. Sableye V is another one which is really, really good. 2 Darkness Energy, 10 damage, plus 60 more for each damage counter on your opponent's active Pokemon. So you drop a bunch of damage counters using Obstagoon and Zigzagoon, and then Sableye comes in and swings for massive damage. Remember, you've got the attack, which will just sit there and block your opponent's basic Pokemon. But Galarian Obstagoon, and weirdly again, it is called Galarian Obstagoon. It's not just called Obstagoon, even though there is no non-Galarian Obstagoon. It's weird the way they're naming in Sword and Shield. Anyway, I digress. You drop damage counters, you block basic Pokemon, and remember that dropping damage counters can stop your opponent evolving up. It can just get rid of the basic Pokemon before they've even got rolling. Now, in terms of other Pokemon, one of the decks just plays Jirachi. It literally just plays Galarian Obstagoon with Yveltal and Sableye, and then 4 Jirachi. Jirachi is the same card we've talked about a billion times before. When it's in the active, look at the top 5 cards of your deck, find a trainer card, put it in your hand, you go to sleep. Oh, look, you have got the option of using a skateboard here to give yourself free retreat even though you're asleep. It's pretty good. The other deck mucks around a little bit more in terms of what we're actually doing here. So it plays a 1/1 line of Zebstrika, just for a little bit of extra consistency, honestly. Discard your hand, draw 4 cards once per turn. Works out quite nicely. It does play the Mimikyu from Cosmic Eclipse. Now this is the one that turns off the abilities of any GX Pokemon with any damage counters on. And you're dropping damage counters wherever you like. So essentially here, you drop a bunch of damage counters, just making sure there's one on each of your opponent's GX with an ability, and now you've turned off all your opponent's abilities. They'll still get abilities the turn they play it, which is upsetting, but there's not much you can do about it. But in the short term, or indeed in the long term, I suppose, you are going to make sure that your opponent doesn't have their abilities. It's actually a really great card in this deck. And there's a copy of Fione. We see Fione popping up in a bunch of Japanese decks at the moment. It's the one that stops you from ever decking out, because you just constantly put Fione on the bottom of your deck, draw into it, put it on the bottom of your deck, etc. But it also forces your opponent to switch their active Pokemon. So it can be really nice if your opponent's got a Pokemon in the active you'd rather they didn't. Now, in terms of energy here, it's just darkness energy. The great thing about both Yveltal and Sableye is not only do they have ridiculous symmetry with Obstagoon, but they also use darkness energy, which really helps. Now, in terms of your trainer cards here, there isn't really a giant list of cards which definitely work in this deck way more than in any other. But there are a couple we need to mention. First of all, Clefairy. Clefairy is seeing a lot of play at the moment. It is popping up in an awful lot of deck lists that I'm seeing. Now, Clefairy, you just put it's a trainer card, it's an item card. But you put it in the active, and it's a 30 HP Pokemon, but it doesn't give up a prize. And then your opponent has to gust around it. But as I've explained in a bunch of decks lately, if all your opponent is playing is Great Catcher, and you're not playing any GXs, I know Yveltal, but you can keep that off the field for the time being, then your opponent cannot gust around Clefairy, or Lily's Pokédoll as it is. And the great thing here is you only need Yveltal later on in the game. You can, unless you start with it, which is sad, you can easily keep it off the field for a while here. And Clefairy really is great. And that is a big one we see in both decks, just giving a huge advantage. It buys you a couple of turns to set up in a deck that wants to be sitting on the bench using the ability to spread damage. So yeah, the one thing you really need here, which is really important, is time to set up. And Clefairy will give it to you. Now we do see a little bit of Clay in one of the decks, discarding top 7 cards of your deck, putting all the item cards you find into your hand. That'll work. Obviously, we've got the combination of Quick Ball and Evolution Incense to search out all your Pokemon. That's pretty huge. Stadium-wise, it's not a great deck for stadiums. The only one we actually see here is one copy of Chaotic Swell in one of the decks. And Chaotic Swell is just a counter stadium. You play it if you've got no other stadium you particularly want to play. We do see Lucky Egg popping up in one of the decks. It's really great with Clefairy. When Clefairy gets KO'd, you get to draw until you've got 7 cards in your hand. Works with any of your Pokemon, but it's especially good with Clefairy, where your opponent doesn't get to take a prize, but you do get to draw until you've got 7 cards in your hand because you had a Lucky Egg on there. This is a really, really fun, legitimately good deck. I have seen multiple different winning lists of this. 2 are in the video. There are a few others I didn't have a particularly clear image of, I've omitted. But really, it is Galarian Obstagoon more than anything, with Sableye and Yveltal. Now, the list that's been on the board so far is a straightforward one that just plays Jirachi, and none of the others. And if we have a look at the second list here, we can see there's a few other one-off Pokemon. We've got the Lucky Egg there to go with the Clefairy. So it's a little bit more tricked out, this one. Although, to be clear, both of the lists play Clefairy, or Lily's Pokédoll. Both of them play 3 copies each. I love this deck. And I know a bunch of people out there really like Galarian Obstagoon, so here are the lists you can be using. And remember that Japan is now in the same format as us, so the second Sword and Shield is legal. These decks are legal. But for now, ladies and gentlemen, I want to know what you think about this deck, so let me know in the comment section. Go nuts! Be nice. And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TheWassy, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCGRadio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all that good stuff, head on over to patreon.com/PTCGRadio, where you can do exactly that. And please do make sure you're checking out youtube.com/WassyPlays, where we talk about games that don't have Pokemon in, but we still love them. But by far the most important thing, as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.